Morning, James.
Morning. I'll just make some introductions. Thank you very much for everybody coming. I'm going to take a back seat today, and I'm going to let some colleagues of mine do the driving. So over in Southland, we have Michelle Panov, who's got waving her hand there. She'll tell you a little bit more herself in a minute, but she's got a background in patient safety and risk management. So she's got a lot of interest and experience in this area, and she's going to be leading most of the session today and co-facilitating here on this site for some of the discussion will be Rachael Clarke, who's one of the improvement facilitators and done plenty of work across lots of places in the DHB as well. So the whole point of these sessions is to introduce you to other people around the DHB who are helpful, such as Michelle and Rachael, so that in the future, if you need such expertise, you've got a friendly face to ask. So I'll hand over to Michelle and Rachael.
Good morning, and thank you all for coming out so bright and early this morning. So as James was saying, my name is Michelle. I'm the Clinical Risk Management Coordinator here in Southland. Myself and Kirsten, who's in Dunedin, manage all the clinical risks that come in through the hospital. And today we're going to go over a little bit about risk and harm. Are you ready? Go ahead. We'll plow right into the presentation as we do have a lot to cover today. So we will get going quite quickly.
Oh, sorry. James, can you see that?
Is that full screen for you guys?
Yes, we can see that nicely, thanks.
Okay, wonderful.
We're having problems getting ours full screen, but carry on.
There we go. Click into that. So today we're going to just talk about the Swiss cheese model and how risk is in a hospital situation. We're going to define what is active and latent errors and go over why patient safety recommends focusing on reducing errors to reduce harm. Go ahead. I'm not one for reading directly off slides, so I'm going to trust that you guys can all read. So when we define harm, one of the definition is what's on the board right now. It's the unintended physical injury resulting from contributing, see, this is why I don't read straight off. It talks about medical care that requires additional monitoring, treatment, hospitalization, or that results in death. Now, when we look at that definition, do you feel that it's missing something? So the ones here in my room can actually acknowledge to me that yes, it is. It's very limited. For that reason, we actually have gone to redefine what harm is. This definition that's been developed, it leaves out whether it was intended or unintended, whether it was omission of error, okay, because medical is cause of harm. Well, what about misdiagnosis, not updating patient information so that we can't get hold of them, in our system? It talks about physical harm, but it totally ignores psychological, emotional, physical, financial harm. There's a lot missing from that definition. So what we have done is we've redefined that definition. And in today's world, it's the unpreventable errors. Okay, we're talking about errors and events. Harm has been and will continue to be redefined as the evidence and research changes. As we know, health changes on a regular basis, and we need to change with it. So through our reflections and our investigations about errors that occur, we constantly adjust the definition of harm. We look at ways to avoid complications. So the definition will continue to broaden. We do have errors that occur that don't cause harm. We call them near misses. And from those near misses, we can learn a lot. If we find out why we had a near miss, we can hopefully stop it from becoming harm. Sometimes harm will occur, but we will not be able to identify what the error was. The majority of the time, error results in some sort of harm to our patients. And as we know, as long as we're causing any of our patients any harm, it's not good enough, and we need to continue to look at it and adjust and figure out what we can do differently. So you have two types of errors. You've got your latent error conditions, and these are things like your busy workload, things that can affect the way that we work. And you have your active failures, pushing the wrong button or ignoring a warning. And again, you can read that. Okay, go ahead. Is everyone familiar with the Swiss cheese model? It's really difficult not seeing the other side to see their reactions of how they, see us, but that's okay.
Do you want to say? I can bring them back.
I wouldn't mind seeing there, at least I can see if they're asleep at the table or not.
Mm-hmm.
So the Swiss cheese model is very representative of healthcare today. We put lots of things in place, and if you think of each one of those layers of the cheese as a different policy or procedure, different stop methods, different controls that we have in place to stop incidents from happening. Now, sometimes no matter what we put in place, the errors will still line up and something will happen and could result in death. When we do an investigation, what we're looking at is where could we have put another stop in? Where could we put another slice of cheese in? Where could we have blocked one of those holes? So this presentation has given you slides around the difference between what is an error or a mishap and what is a violation. So when we look at this, as you can see when you go down to the left, it says violation. A violation is when you have done something intentionally. I am going to harm this person, and I am going to come into work drunk, or I am going to cut that person here because I feel like it. That's intentional. That's a violation. And I'm hoping that that never happens in healthcare. Errors can be different kinds of errors, intentional and non-intentional. So we can have slips or lapses where we forgotten to maybe do a step and it resulted in an error. We grabbed the wrong medication, misread something, and it was a lapse or a mistake. So you've got your slips, your oopses, you've got your lapses, you forgot, and you've got your outright mistakes. I screwed up. But all those are done without intent, but they still can result in harm. Okay, so I want you to keep that in mind when we go to the next slide. So you forgot to tell your patient to schedule a follow-up appointment. What do you think? Is that a violation, a lapse, a slip?
A lapse.
A lapse, correct. The next one, you tried to give your patient a pamphlet on healthy eating, but you grab one on sleep hygiene instead.
That's probably a slip.
That's a slip,
They're on the
absolutely.
same rack in our office.
Very easily to grab the wrong
They're
one.
all the same logos and colours.
Yeah, it's for consistency.
Yeah.
You don't wash your hands because you're distracted.
It's probably a mistake.
A mistake or a lapse, you forgot.
Depends what their job is. Like if it's like if they're a surgeon and they don't wash their hands, that's different to me not washing my hands.
So that probably be you don't wash your hands because you don't feel like it or you don't have the time. So what would that be? If it's not a lapse or a mistake, it's a
violation.
It's a violation. So if you're like a surgeon and you're going in to do a surgery and you don't wash your hands because you've been called in at the last moment and then you put your hands on the patient.
Okay.
Yeah. So you misdiagnose your patient's pain. What would that be?
It's probably a mistake.
Yeah, exactly. So you can see there's a clear difference between a mistake or a lapse and a violation. Great. So we focus largely on the conditions under which individuals and providers and healthcare teams work. We recognize that it is human nature to make mistakes. We're not perfect. We know that. Well, I hope we know that. But what we want to do is to recognize when we do make a mistake, an error or a lapse, that we're actually reflecting on why that happened. What do we need to put in place to stop that from happening again? So that's basically the focus of my job is looking at all the different trends and errors that are happening within an organization and assisting you guys to help find how do we put more blocks in place? What can we do? How can we put more layers in that Swiss cheese to prevent that from happening before? Because we know we're going to make mistakes once in a while. So this slide tells us about accountability versus blame. When I got to looking at this part of the presentation, I have to say I kind of went, not a big fan of these slides. And the reason for that is, as a clinical risk management coordinator, we focus on error. We focus on reducing harm for the patient. If something has been done intentionally and is a violation, that's a different pathway. Okay, that goes down HR, human resources, and it's a disciplinary kind of a pathway. Our focus is, can we prevent these things from happening again? What procedure, what aspect wasn't in place to prevent that accident from happening? So for that reason, the next couple of slides are not my favorite, but they're in here, so we're going to put them up here for you to see. So this is a decision tree that they offer you guys, and it is it's about whether it is a violation or an incident, like an accident. We call them events, adverse events here at the hospital. And I'll just leave you to look at that for just a second.
I think this comes in the teacher's nature of the American health
Exactly.
context by the IHI.
Yeah. I figured someone would tell me why we have it in here, but honestly, we focus on the mistakes. As soon as I see something that comes through that is a violation, that's usually a discussion about that it needs to go another process. Okay. So patient safety has broadened its focus from reducing error to encompassing preventing harm. And that's what we're all about. We are about actively preventing harm for our patients. As long as there's still error that happen in a healthcare system, we are going to continue to look at how can we plug up that Swiss cheese holes? How can we prevent it from happening again? We are going to watch a little YouTube clip about a zoo. Now I realize this is not healthcare, but we can learn a lot from different areas and what they do to prevent harm. Forestry, the other one, all have very good things in place. And even though you go, okay, it's not healthcare, sometimes the systems that they have put in place bring a lot of insight to what we do here. So we're just going to watch this clip, and then we'll break apart in the two different rooms and have a little bit of a discussion of it. Yeah.
We go outside of healthcare to see our system in a new way and get fresh ideas for improvement. Today we're going to learn about a safety system to handle a totally different hazard, one we rarely face in healthcare. We're going to look at dangerous snakes.
Hi, I'm Kathy Duncan, and today we're going outside of healthcare to the Central Florida Zoo.
The Central Florida Zoo has a lot to teach us about safety. Specifically, we're going to learn 3 valuable lessons about reliability. In order to create reliable systems, we need to prevent failure, identify failures and mitigate their effects, and learn from failure to better design our systems. How does the zoo apply those concepts when handling venomous snakes?
My name is Michelle Hoffman. I'm a reptile keeper at the Central Florida Zoo. I've been here for 4 years, and I work with one of the largest collections of venomous reptiles in the Southeast within AZA Zoos.
Michelle took us behind the scenes to show us how they stay safe when handling snakes, to clean their enclosures and to move them.
The red and the green cage cards actually will tell us at a quick glance if the snake in the enclosure is venomous or non-venomous. So the red obviously is the venomous, the green is the non-venomous, red stop, green go. And what's this number 1 up there? The numbers above the enclosures actually tell the keepers how many animals are in the enclosure. So for example, there's only 1 Aruba Island rattlesnake in here, and there are 3 pythons in that enclosure. So we know if we open the door and we only see 2 animals, there might be 1 hiding somewhere, to keep your eyes open and actually find all of those animals before you reach in or before you do any work in the enclosure.
All this helps prevent snake bites. But what if a failure does occur? When keepers handle snakes, they work in pairs, so that if something goes wrong, there's a trained person there to help them.
We're expected to work really closely with our coworkers and our managers. We have a very open relationship when it comes to trust and being able to speak up.
They also use a belt clip with key information about the snake, such as the antivenom.
So that way, if something goes wrong, somebody can come in from the outside, know exactly how to handle the situation and which antivenom to bring with you to the hospital.
This helps to reduce harm if a failure does occur. The next principle of reliability is that you may redesign your systems based on what you've learned from failures.
It's been over 20 years since we've had a venomous snake bite here at the Central Florida Zoo, and one of the reasons for that great track record is because we were always adapting and adjusting and learning how to improve our systems to prevent any failures in the future.
For example, they used to use a lanyard instead of the belt clip with all the snake information.
We actually switched it to the belt clip in order for it to be completely out of our way and not in any sort of position where it could get attached on anything or a snake's tail could get hooked around it or anything like that.
They also modified their trash barrel to have a plexiglass window on the top so that they could see where the snake is.
One of the main ways that we do learn is from other people, other facilities, other reptile professionals. So we are expected to have close relationships with those colleagues. If we have a system that maybe went a little bit wrong or that maybe wasn't working out the best, we can go to them and ask for advice without feeling like we're inferior or something like that.
Every time I visit the zoo, I see opportunities to standardize, mitigate failure, and even redesign the work. But they've taken opportunities to really look at how they can keep not only their keepers safe, but they can keep their animals safe. So as you go about your daily work and daily life, look at other opportunities to really see how you might can bring things back to healthcare.
So they're on mute at the moment. They're just discussing this on their end, are they?
Sorry.
Are they on mute or can you hear us?
They should be able to hear us. I'll just,
So we'll leave you guys to discuss with Rachael that video that we just watched, and we'll come back together in, Maria, how long?
2 minutes.
In 2 minutes, and as we have another video to watch today. So we'll leave you guys to
5 minutes maybe.
Sorry, 5 minutes. We'll leave you to discuss for 5 minutes with James and Rachel on that end. So what do you guys think? So hopefully you guys had some robust discussions on that end as well. This group has really identified a lot about learning from our near misses and learning from doing things simple, like the open glass in the buckets. You can see the snake, you know, just simple things of laminating on, putting on their waist so they could read and associate it to which snake it was. You can actually design really simple safety nets that can prevent a lot of our accidents from happening. The next video that we have for you guys today is actually a local story that occurred, and it really highlights the importance of investigation, communication, and involving the family. And that is one thing I think we don't do very well in healthcare, is we've focused investigations on root cause analysis and London Protocol, and we forget about associating the family right from the beginning. And so this YouTube is about Matt, who passed away. And I will warn you right now, it is a very emotional story. And if it does bring up some emotion, please touch base with one of us that are in the room to support you if you want to talk about it. But we'll touch base again after the video quickly, and we'll just get into the video now. I'll put that up full screen for these guys.
Friday was just another ordinary day. Last day of the week for me working, because I worked as a district nurse. I'd come home and I was just sitting there into my cup of tea, and then I looked out the door and I could see Matt coming in from outside, and he was walking towards me holding onto his right hand side and sort of leaning into it, and I looked at him and I thought, appendix. But it didn't look good, so I thought, well, let's go up to the hospital and check this out. And that's where it all started. He went straight into A&E, and he was seen by the surgeon on call that night, and he confirmed he had appendicitis and that we should, take it out that night. The appendectomy went well, and then between theatre and recovery, Matt had laryngospasm, so he'd stopped breathing. So they bagged him, gave him reversal agents, and got him into the recovery room. And it was taking quite a while. I was waiting outside recovery, so eventually they came and got me and brought me in.
How you doing?
And told me what had happened. Matt, he was obviously breathing, but he was very angry, and they're having trouble calming him down. And then Matt coughed up some pink froth into his mask, and I just watched the nurse wipe it out. So I said to the anaesthetist, did you see that? And her answer was, it's probably just trauma from intubation. Why would I question what she's telling me? Because I'm concentrating on calming him down and just being there as his mum. After that, they called the nurse from the ward to come and get Matt and take him back to the ward because they felt that he was good to go. I asked Matt to go into the kids' ward because he wasn't yet 16, and they had TVs. But I did it on the understanding that if there was any complications or any reason not to go to the ward, then that's fine. We wouldn't go there. But the ward is where we went. Once we got Matt settled into his room, I kissed him, told him I loved him, and I said in the morning, he'd calmed down by then. And I remember looking at the couch bed thing beside him and thinking, I could stay there. And but he wasn't in the mood for that. So I just went out of his room and I said to the afternoon nurse, I'm not comfortable. Where are you sitting? So I checked her, and she told me she sits at the desk right outside his room. And, I also said, look, I want you to keep him on a monitor all night and ring me for anything, or even if he just wants to talk to me, give me a call. So I went home. We got the phone call about 6:30, 6:40, on Saturday morning. Dave answered, and the nurse said to him, Matt has respiratory arrested. And Dave had no idea what that meant. But I remember him saying...
Did you want us to come in?
So I took the phone off him and asked what happened. They told me...
What's happening? Matt's not breathing.
That was it. I just jumped out the bed, and Dave's still looking at me wondering what's going on. I said, Matt isn't breathing. So we rushed to the hospital.
One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
And when we got to his room, they were still bagging him. And the doctor, the anaesthetist, the nurses were all either working on him or standing around, and couldn't believe it. He'd already had a lot of medication given when you resuscitate people. His pupils were really dilated, so at that stage we didn't know, was it from the medication that he's been given, or has he lost a lot of oxygen to his brain? We're unable to tell, because that looked really bad if you look at it from a nurse's perspective. But from a mum, I could see they were giving him an oxygen, but he was breathing with that oxygen, and he had a pulse. So he was still there. Then we took him on his bed down to ICU, and the doctors were talking with the team in Christchurch about what had gone on and what's the best things to do for Matt. So they sent a retrieval team for Matthew on the plane. It took a long time to stabilise Matt. Every time we moved him, we were just trying to get x-rays to see what was going on with his lungs. His oxygen saturation would just dive. And then it took about 8 hours to get him stable enough to be able to move. So at that stage, the doctor took us into a room and talked to us and said, look, Matt's got a 5% chance of living. I'll take that chance from his mum. And he may not even make the flight in the plane. They said one parent can go with him in the plane. I was like, well, no way. Not after you've just told me he might not even make the plane flight, so you can make room for him, which they did. And we transferred him to the plane, got him up in the air, and it was the most stable he'd been the whole time. He was amazing. Over the following days, while we were in ICU, there were a lot of different specialists came in, and they'd stand at the end of his bed and look at that. They'd look at his notes, and then they'd leave, and you wouldn't really hear what was going on. He was connected to every machine going. He was on dialysis as well. Still just trying to get him stable. It was a few days before we were able to get him to an MRI to see what was going on with his brain. Seeing Matt lying in bed was devastating, because it's not Matt. Matt never was still. He was always on the move. He loved mountain biking with his friends. They built their own tracks as well. Telling him he couldn't do something was like a red flag to a bull. He enjoyed life, tried everything, and he didn't really care what anybody thought. And then the MRI, we got called into the lead doctor's office, and he told us how bad it was. Matt had no oxygen to his brain. So he was being kept alive just on the machines. Wasn't going to survive. So said once they turn the machines off, he would pass. But I still wasn't ready. I don't think you're ever ready. So I said, just give me one more night. So we did. So we got one more night with him. And I remember asking the nurse, the amazing nurses, saying I'd love to just lay beside her all night. So she's great. She said, I can fix that. And she went round to the side of Matt's bed. She pulled him over to the side and made room for me. She said, there you go. Sleep there. I did. So I got to hug him all night. And it was wonderful. It was worth so much to me to be able to do that. And then the following day, with a lot of family around, very close friends, they turned the machines off. And I looked at the monitor for a bit. It was slowing down. And I just gave Matt a hug. He had the ear on his heart. I just listened to it. Slow down till it stopped beating. There you go. Yeah. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. After Matt died, I was still pretty much a zombie, so it took a while to function properly again. But I was really lucky. I have amazing family and friends, so I've always had support. I was really lucky to have that support. I had contact with Karen Belsfield from the hospital. She was Director of Nursing there, and she kept me up to date, you know, because I remember saying to her, just find out what happened. That's all I want. Find out what happened.
Hello, Karen speaking.
As a DHB, it's really important to take accountability when something's gone wrong. I was part of the team that reviewed this case, and you speak to people involved and get an overview of what had happened over that time, and you review the clinical file and pull it all together and get an overview and a picture of what actually had happened over those hours. It's to understand what went wrong and what were the systems and processes that weren't quite right or that may have contributed to the outcome. There were a lot of reports that came my way because I wanted to see everything. I wanted to make sure that they were doing everything they could to find out what happened. I had four different specialist anaesthetists reports, police, coroner, hospital reports. I don't know, they seem to be never ending. But I just wanted to make sure I did everything that I could for Matt to find out what happened. Heather has every right to be angry about this. Matt should not have died. When Matt returned from theatre to recovery, he had a laryngospasm. And what we know, following the investigation and the coroner's inquest into it, was that he developed negative pressure pulmonary oedema. And what that leads to is an accumulation of fluid in the lungs. And that is easily reversible. It is treatable. And there were points during Matt's 12 hours post-operatively where it should have and could have been identified that was happening, and it could have been treated. What we decided after we'd been through everything was that there were a series of things that may have contributed to the outcome for Matt. And as a result of that, we developed a long list of recommendations to improve our systems and processes. What became clear through all the reports that I read was there was huge lack of communication between everybody involved, really. They missed a lot of symptoms. There was a lot of indicators there that was, showing what was going on. But laryngospasms happen, but that doesn't make it normal. And that's what they'd done. They'd normalised the abnormal. And then they didn't use any critical thinking. Matt, just a few of his symptoms, he was angry. He was extremely angry. So, was he hypoxic at that time? Possibly. He was being given really high flows of oxygen, 8 to 10 litres a minute. and he was only saturating at around 92%, and sometimes that was dropping even lower. And this is a really fit, healthy 15-year-old kid who, even in A&E when he was in pain, was still saturating at 100%. He coughed up pink froth into his mask. So, you know, what was going on at that time? So nobody put any of those things together, and they put him in the ward. So what happened during the night? You know, how many times was he alarming? What happened when it alarmed? You know, Matt started snoring during the night. Matt doesn't snore. I've never heard him snore. I know the nurse won't know that, but I know that's an unusual symptom, especially when it's really loud snoring. But, you know, if he is, why not check on him? What was happening? So there was a lot of indicators there, but nobody was putting two and two together. And Matt paid for that with his life. There you go. Obviously, I've been through a really hard time in my life, and as is all my family. But, you know, the most important thing to come out of it for me is to encourage other people to speak up, and for health professionals to realise how important it is to communicate and to be an advocate for your patients. Because I strongly believe if people had communicated and, you know, really looked at what was happening with Matt, he'd still be alive today. And I want to stop that from happening. And all it takes is just communication. That's the biggest thing I can say. Communicate, and most importantly, work together as a team. Use critical thinking, never normalise the abnormal, and, you know, listen to your gut feeling, because if something doesn't feel right, then it probably isn't right. Check it out. No question's a dumb question. Just working together, that's like the most important thing.
And a cuppa?
Yeah.
Katie's got one, she might have made us one. No, to make us a couple, no.
I mean, I had two choices when this happened. I could crawl up in a ball and just forget about life, but actually it wasn't a choice for me, because I had a husband and I had 3 kids that, you know, that I loved very much. So my only way forward was to fight, and it made me a stronger person because of it. Not because it was ever something I wanted to do, but something I had to do. Heather's story isn't about naming and shaming and blaming, actually. It's about 4 key learnings that are applicable to any clinical practice. And we like to stress those 4 key learnings. The first is, don't normalise the abnormal, because there are dangers in normalising the abnormal. Theatre teams do see laryngospasm all of the time, but actually it's not normal for the patient. So the risks of normalising the abnormal are quite important to remember. The second thing we talk about is documentation, and clinicians get tired of hearing it. Documentation is important because it helps us think through what might be happening for the patient. It also gives us a clinical picture in its entirety down the track if we want to come back and review what might have happened for that patient in that moment. The third point is the importance of critical thinking. It's important that all of the time we're thinking, what might this mean? What's going on for the patient in this moment? Then engage your brain. Don't assume that just by completing the documentation your job is done. You need to constantly be thinking, what might this mean for the patient? And the final key learning is speak up. And speaking up is not just about enabling and empowering a more junior staff member to challenge and question a more senior clinician. It's actually about enabling anybody in that moment to speak up. And part of that is listening to the patient, listening to the family, and listening to our colleagues, because that questioning can be really important.
still get emotional every time I watch that. It just shows you, a lot of times when incidents occur, yes, patients' families may get angry, but the reality is when it comes down to it, and Helen presented at one of the sessions that I went to last year, what she just wants to get across to people is she just wants people to learn from their mistakes so that it doesn't happen to somebody else again in the future. And it isn't about pointing fingers and trying to blame somebody for an error that has happened. The way our system is designed, it's about looking at how we let you guys down and what can we put in place so that this doesn't happen again in the future. Healthcare is a very complex world, and it's forever changing. And as we all know, communication, documentation, and not normalizing the abnormal is very difficult when you get very busy, and there's a lot of expectations on all of us. I guess my end message to everyone is reporting errors that happened is very important. I know it takes extra time to go on to Safety First to put these incidents in, but without a trail of what has happened, we can't see where our major gaps are. We can't see the commonality of what's happening, so we can go, okay, this is actually a trend and we need to do something about it. So please put in your Safety First incidents. If you're called upon to do an investigation, I know some of you have been thrown into investigation with no training, to please contact myself or Kirsten, and we will be happy to provide you with some training so that we're doing some good quality investigations that actually put something in place that stops these from happening in the future. And please, if you have any emotions that have come up from that video, stop and talk to one of us before you leave. I want to thank you all for coming here this morning. And if you have any questions, now's time to ask.
Yeah, we've got a few more minutes left. It was pretty hard going watching that, I think. But as we watched that, was there anything that sort of came to after? I know we had to deal with the stress of watching it, but for things like normalising the abnormal, for instance, was there anything as you watched that you thought, that could happen to me, or things I could, how would I stop that happening?
Education and support for staff has got to be critical. Education about situational awareness, about critical thinking, about processes, not well documented demises. We've seen those historically, and I know things like our charts, they've got systems around that to mitigate now, but we're still getting well documented demises. So just education around that critical thinking.
Yes, sorry. The importance of logging things in Safety First, because we do actually see a pattern. I know you may think, oh look, it's just happened in my area, but I know recently we've noticed, because they do all come to a central point within a directorate, and I look at those, and that's where we pick up that actually there is something wrong in that area, because it may happen to James, but then it may happen to another consultant, but James and that consultant don't talk about it, but we actually do see it, and if we see that, then we can do something about it.
How many Safety First do you think that actually don't get done?
A lot. We know there's a lot. So I hear of things. So actually, speaking of that, it was because one of, I'll use an example of what's just happened, is we had an incident down in DSA, and then when I was speaking to the anaesthetist about it, the anaesthetist told me that actually, I don't know if you know, but that happened a couple of weeks ago with this anaesthetist. So I'm like, that's interesting. So I spoke to that anaesthetist. He went, yeah, so this happened. And I was like, well, please could you email me the details so we can get put in Safety First. But no, we do know there is a lot that isn't going into Safety First. There's 3 people talking that we hear about other incidents, and then we get it's like, actually that should be logged. Because it ends up that it is a SAC. We score the SACs 1 to 4. 1 to 2 we thoroughly investigate. 3 and 4 gets investigated by the directorate. But it turns out 1 was a 1 and 1's a 2 because serious harm came to both. So, yeah.
And investigating them in a timely fashion is really important. We have events that are still on our system that are a year or so old. And that how can you go back and actually investigate if you're not doing it in a timely fashion? So when an event comes through, we're hoping to have them actualized within 2 days, which will allow that investigation to get started when everything's still fresh and when we can find out the information. So there is a lot on the system, but it is a very small representation of actually the events that occur within in the DHB.
Definitely. One of the things though is that we have to lead our teams. They have to understand that actually spending the 5 minutes is worth it. Because otherwise, you know, drug areas would be a good one in the coup. You guys are like, oh, she's going to put it on safety first. But knowing that it goes to a committee, that there will be an action, allows the teams to actually then do it. Sometimes you might please for them and you might not want them. But it's about everyone understanding that actually it is worth doing it. Because often it can feel quite removed and they don't hear the outcomes. Well, why should I bother? I don't know what happened. No one did anything. From an on-the-ground perspective, that can be what, you know, so if you can cultivate that culture that actually it does matter, it does work, please do it, and this is why, then you get a lot more buy-in and that happens.
Are there any processes around reporting back when it comes to safety first to various directorates? So that we can get engagement, you know, better engagement?
So we feedback, so for example with Lyle, if one of the anaesthetists or anaesthetics logs something, Lyle will come and sit with me and then when they put stuff into safety first, there's an option, if they want feedback, they can tick yes, we want feedback, and then Lyle and I'll discuss it. I'll email it to Claire and Lisa, but Lyle will feed back to whoever logged the incident.
Right.
I think that has been identified as an issue in the organisation though, that we don't have some of those processes for closing the loop from things, so everywhere does it a little bit differently.
I'll just give you an update with the Safety First, and there has just been a change within the system. When you type in your feedback into that feedback box in Safety First, the system now generates an email back to that person. So once a week, it will generate those emails, and so the actual submitter is going to get an email about what you've typed into that box. So as above is not a good comment, but if you're actually writing something in there now, they will get it. So we're trying to close that loop.
Something also I've just noticed with Safety First as well.
We're in the middle of doing that.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
With Safety First, they've just changed also down the left-hand side where the menu is, you can actually look at the incidents you've logged, so you can look at your previous incidents you've logged, so you can see if any work's actually being done on it. So if you log something and you want to see if anyone's investigating or what's happening with it, you just click on it and it takes you back into it.
There's been a few changes. There has been a few changes in Safety First. Our team is currently, we're working on adjusting the policy so it actually reflects the changes that are in Safety First. And there will be information coming out very soon around, for managers of everyone who's using the system, of what they look like. Okay, so that the sidebar is one of those changes as well. So I'm glad that you've been able to see that.
Do they do Safety First at the orientations? No? Do they do a presentation on Safety First?
Not that I'm aware of.
Because when I've sat at an orientation years ago and Julie O'Connor stood up and went through Safety First, who's obviously prior to you. But I found that quite informative. I've had to use Safety First to log an incident once when I burnt myself. But like, I think not just clinical staff, non-clinical staff probably need to know what's like. There'd be ones that would never know what it was.
I remember 18 months ago.
Yeah,
it's not on
the and it used to be on the agenda because that's how I've been to one,
So
and that was several years ago, probably 5 years ago now.
I think that's a really important thing. I was in a forum recently where there was a mix of nursing and junior medical people, and none of the junior medical people knew anything about safety first.
I get a lot of they know
Some of
what
the
it is,
senior
but
doctors have
no
said,
idea where to
well,
find
I would
it.
never use it, it's a nursing job.
So that's about everybody changing that perception. I think you're right, Karen, I think that does exist.
Is it designed as a clinical tool, safety first, to report things, or is it anything? Because like, what if you're driving, so if you're driving a work vehicle?
It's everything.
So yeah, it's definitely not.
So safety first is meant for all errors, lapses. It is not meant for if it was a violation. But mind you, sometimes those get put in too, and then we'll put a mark, actually, this is the HR process, it still needs to be investigated.
It might be the only way you find out the violations if it happens.
And exactly, so, you just put everything in safety first.
So if people feel like they've got to go sit down with their manager to figure out what safety first is and how to log something, then,
James, have you got anything left to say?
I'm going to say I'm leaving. So I didn't want to interrupt. No, I've had to go operate. But that was a really powerful video. There's a few wet eyes in the room here. I think it shows the power of patient stories in trying to affect good change. So that's also a really good example of using that tool. There's plenty of other videos like that on YouTube, which
Big enough box of tissues, I'm sorry.
I think system changes are the best way around those things. You can think of lots of things you can change the whole culture and system around the people who are working in there, so it doesn't rely on one person to stop this thing happening. But thank you very much, Michelle, for your expertise, and also thank you, Rachel, for your facilitation here too.
Thank you for inviting me.
And it's coming up to 8, and the people got stuff to do, so I will close the session. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Rachel.